You know, I've always believed that older people carry entire libraries inside them, whole lifetimes of stories, tucked behind quiet eyes and gentle laughter. I found myself wondering what would happen if we just stopped and asked them. Not for advice exactly, but for wisdom, the kind that comes from living, from getting things wrong, from finding your way through the years. So I started asking a simple question. If you could share one life lesson, just one, what would it be? And the answers? They made me laugh, they made me think, and more than anything, they reminded me how much beauty there still is in ordinary life. So let's sit together for a while and listen to the people who've already walked the road we're on, the ones who've learned, often the hard way, what really matters in the end. Welcome. Come on in, get comfy, and let's sit for a while. You can tell a lot about a person by how they answer a simple question. I started asking one that seems to bring people to a thoughtful hush, no matter who they are. If you could share one life lesson, just one, what would it be? I didn't ask it with any big plan in mind. It wasn't for a book or a speech. It was just curiosity. Because sometimes I think the world is so full of noise, advice, opinions, and influences that we forget to ask the people who have actually lived a little longer. The ones who've seen the seasons turn, who've lost and loved and made peace with their own reflection. So I started asking, quietly, casually, at the post office, in the supermarket queue, at the doctor's waiting room. I've always been one for chatting to people I don't know, so this was a simple next step, and it turns out people like being asked. I particularly like chatting to older people anyway, because they, for the most part, seem very keen to talk. I often wonder if I'm the first person they've actually chatted to that day, or even that week. I remember one woman, grey hair in a messy bun, wearing one of those old cardigans that looked like it had been with her through at least 3 decades of weather. When I asked her my question, she laughed. A real, deep belly laugh that made the people around us glance over, smile without even knowing why. She said, "Oh, love, my best life lesson. Don't wait for perfect. You'll miss half of your life trying." She told me she'd spent years waiting for the right time to travel, to start painting again, to forgive her sister. And then one day, she said, she looked at the clock and realised her right time had quietly walked out the door without her. Now, she said, if I fancy ice cream at 10 in the morning, I have it. If the sun's out, I sit in it. And if someone I love crosses my mind, I ring them right then. Life's not a waiting room, it's the ride. I liked that. Life's not a waiting room. It's stuck with me ever since. The kind of thought you carry around and every so often pull out to remind yourself not to wait for perfect either. Then there was Arthur, 86, widowed for 12 years and still sharp enough to notice when I'd swapped my reading glasses for a stronger pair. He said his life lesson was simple. Keep something that's yours. He didn't mean possessions, though he did proudly tell me he still had his old workshop, even if he mostly just sat in it these days, for the smell of the wood. What he meant was, keep a piece of yourself that doesn't belong to your children, or your job, or even your partner. Something that's just yours. A small joy that reminds you who you are when nobody's watching. He said when his wife was alive, she used to bake bread every Sunday. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she loved the feel of it. After she passed, he said he kept one of her aprons hanging in the kitchen, not as a shrine, but as a reminder that joy can live in ordinary things. You lose people, he said, but don't lose yourself. Not completely. Keep something that's yours and keep doing it. And then there was Margaret. Margaret was one of those women who wears lipstick no matter what, even at the gym, I suspect. Her lesson came with a wink. Stop worrying about your thighs. They're fine. She said she'd spent too many years fretting about her reflection, chasing numbers, pounds, wrinkles, birthdays. And then I realised, she said, no one was looking. Everyone's too busy worrying about their own thighs. We both laughed. But then she grew quiet and said something that stayed with me ever since. Don't waste your youth trying to fix what was never broken. There's wisdom in laughter if you listen closely enough. As I collected these stories, I realised something beautiful. Wisdom doesn't always come wrapped the way you expect it to be. Sometimes it comes wearing comfortable shoes and smells faintly of lavender hand cream. It shows up in the checkout line. It shares your park bench. It tells you the truth when you weren't even sure you were ready to hear it. And I suppose that's what I've been learning through this. That older people aren't just living history, they're living proof. Proof that heartbreak doesn't last forever. Proof that laughter still finds its way in. Proof that time, for all of its cruelty, is also an incredible teacher. So I kept asking, and I started writing them down as soon as I got home, so I didn't forget any of the details. I also wrote their name, where we chatted, and a description of them. Over the years I've collected quite the list, and sometimes I'll just sit and read through some of them and remember the person that gave the life lesson. Actually, it's one of my favourite things to do when I'm taking time out for me. After a while, it felt less like I was collecting answers and more like people were remembering them in real time. You could almost see it happen. Their eyes would drift, they'd smile or sigh, and then something gentle would arrive, like a small, honest confession that they'd been waiting years for someone to ask. There was a couple sitting on a park bench one afternoon, hand in hand, the kind of old where the jackets matched by accident. I asked them my question, and they looked at each other as if deciding who would go first. She nodded at him. He cleared his throat and said, "Love is simple. It's us who complicate it." He said when they were younger, they thought love meant agreeing, that being right somehow meant being close. Then one day after an argument about whether to sell the house, his wife said, "You don't have to understand me, just listen." And he said that changed everything. Love isn't about keeping score, he said. It's about keeping time. Staying long enough to remember why you liked each other in the first place. She squeezed his hand at that point and said, "And saying sorry before the kettle boils." I thought that was perfect. There's a whole marriage in that sentence. Another lesson came from a woman called Eileen, who had lost her husband not long before. She told me she didn't like the word widow. She said it felt like the label that stole her name. Her life lesson came quietly, her voice trembling just a little. Be grateful for the small, ordinary days. They're the ones you'll miss. She said when you're young, you think you'll remember the big moments, the trips, the birthdays, the surprises. But it's the in-between days that come back to you. The morning coffee, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the way someone always hummed in the kitchen. Ordinary, she said. It's the good stuff. We just don't know it at the time. She smiled then and added, if you have an ordinary day, thank it. That's peace disguised as routine. I remember walking home after that conversation, noticing how beautiful the light looked on the pavement. Ordinary light on an ordinary day, and I thought, maybe that's the secret to life, seeing the sacred in the simple. And then there was James. He must have been around 80, but had the posture of someone still waiting to be called into the next dance. He lived a big, messy, beautiful life. 3 marriages, 1 heartbreak, and 2 very patient daughters, as he put it. When I asked him his life lesson, he laughed and said, don't take yourself too seriously. You're temporary. At first it sounded a bit blunt, but he meant it kindly. He said he used to believe that every decision was life or death, every mistake a catastrophe. Now, he said, most of those disasters are just funny stories told over tea. You'll outlive most of your worries, he said. They age quicker than you do. Then he leaned in closer, his voice softer. But take your laughter seriously. The world will try and take that from you. Don't let it. And I realised laughter in older people isn't frivolous. It's a form of resilience. It's what happens when you've seen the worst of life and still choose to keep your heart open. I think what struck me most listening to all these voices was how often the lessons came wrapped in kindness. Not self-help slogans, not grand philosophies, just plain human goodness. No one talked about success or ambition or winning. They talked about forgiveness, letting go. About the times they didn't say, I love you, soon enough. And how they'd learnt not to make that mistake again. One woman told me, if you think of someone, call them. Don't wait for an occasion. You might be the reminder they needed that day that they matter. Another said, try to leave people better than you found them, even if it's just with a smile. And it reminded me that wisdom, real wisdom, isn't a lightning bolt. It's more like a candlelight, passed quietly hand to hand. It doesn't shout. It glows. I started this little project because I was curious, but somewhere along the way it stopped being curiosity and started feeling like a deep respect. Because what these older people were sharing wasn't just advice, it was evidence that you can lose and love and break and begin again and still find beauty in your days. In a world that glorifies speed and youth, they were teaching me the power of slow, steady grace. And it made me realise, maybe that's what getting older really is. Not giving up on life, but giving up on the noise. The more I listened, the more I realised something simple but startling. Wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't march in waving a flag or demand attention. It slips in quietly between the pauses, the laughter, the sighs of, I wish I'd known sooner. Most of the people I spoke to didn't even call what they said wisdom. They'd shrug and say, "Oh, I don't know if it's advice, it's just what I've learned." But that's exactly what made it powerful. It wasn't polished or rehearsed, it was lived. And when you gather enough of those lived moments, you start to notice a pattern, a thread that runs through almost every story. It's not about money or appearance or the things we chase so hard when we're younger. It's about love, kindness, time, and the quiet courage it takes to keep showing up through it all. One man, maybe in his 90s, summed it up perfectly. He said, "The trick to a good life is learning what to let go of and doing it before it gets heavy." He didn't mean giving up, he meant lightening up. He said people spent too much of their lives carrying things that were never theirs to keep. Grudges, guilt, the need to be understood by everyone. "It's exhausting," he said. "You can't dance with all that weight." And there it was again, another tiny truth disguised as an offhand comment. We carry too much and we forget to dance. There's a stillness that comes with age, I think. A kind of quiet bravery. You stop trying to impress people who don't matter, and you start loving the ones who do. Exactly as they are. Not for what they can offer, but for what they are when the world stops watching. Every conversation reminded me that growing older isn't a shrinking of life, it's a refining of it. It's when the unnecessary starts to fall away, and what's left is what's real. The older we get, the smaller our circles might become. But maybe that's because our hearts grow more selective. We stop chasing the loudest rooms and start choosing the ones where we can hear ourselves think. There's another woman I'll never forget. Her name was Elsie, 92. When I asked her for her best life lesson, she thought for a long time and finally said, "Be kind. It costs nothing, but it pays in peace." She said when you reach her age, you don't remember every conversation you've had, but you remember how people made you feel. And she hoped she'd made people feel safe, not special, not impressed, just safe. That word stayed with me. Safe. Maybe that's what kindness really is. Creating safety in a world that can feel unpredictable. A soft space where someone can breathe. As I walked home after talking to her, I kept thinking about how the people we call older aren't just ahead of us in years, they're ahead of us in understanding. They've already faced the things we're afraid of. They've already learned how to live through the days that feel impossible and somehow still find joy. They don't sugarcoat life. They've seen too much for that, but they offer something better. Perspective. Because perspective says, this won't last forever. It's okay to rest. You're allowed to change your mind. And sometimes, most beautifully, you'll laugh about this one day. So here's what I've taken from all these beautiful, wrinkled, radiant teachers. That life doesn't have to be perfect to be good. That happiness isn't a goal, it's a moment. And we miss it when we're too busy rushing to the next one. That forgiveness frees you more than anyone else. And that the bravest thing you'll ever do is keep your heart open, even when it's been broken. The older people I spoke to didn't have all the answers, but they didn't need to. They'd learned to live with the questions and to find peace in the not knowing. And maybe that's the deepest wisdom of all. If you ever find yourself lost, overwhelmed, uncertain, a little scared of the world, look for someone with laugh lines and a patient smile. Ask them what they've learned. You might not get the perfect answer, but you'll get something better, a glimpse of grace in human form. I think what struck me most after all those conversations is how simple wisdom really is. It isn't loud or dramatic, it's quiet and kind, often wrapped in humour. It lives in small sentences like, be kind, or don't wait for perfect. And maybe that's why we miss it sometimes. It whispers, it doesn't shout. The older people I spoke to reminded me that life doesn't have to be perfect to be good, that love is simple, that laughter still matters, especially when times are hard, and that there's always something beautiful in the ordinary, if we slow down long enough to see it. So maybe that's the lesson for all of us, to keep listening, to keep learning, and to remember that we're all just stories in the making, each of us still becoming. If this video spoke to you, I'd love to hear your life lesson, the one you'd want to pass along. You never know whose heart it might help. Thank you for sharing your time with me. Take gentle care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.